Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Clarke. I am Javian.
And I'm Tyler. And today I'm actually going to interview Javian and pick his brain on the college application teaching process, how that works, the ins and outs, things that maybe they don't teach you in school, or, tips and tricks that he's picked up along the way. But before we get into all that, Javian, coffee, talk to me. What are you drinking?
So I had to go out and get a fresh bag of beans today, actually. And I went to a local coffee shop and I got I had a bunch of their stuff, Perks Coffee out of Savannah. And I got their Honduras blend, which is a strawberry and almond tasting notes. So trying it out right now as we speak, and it is delicious. And we'll see how it goes. I've been continuing to brewing it on pour over. I've actually borrowed well, not borrow, my colleague. We both are really into coffee, so we like brew coffee in the morning when we get to the office because our offices are like next door. So I've been using his V60 recipe. So he's been like showing me his recipe. So I've been using that recipe, and it's actually really good. So interested to try different methods and different recipes that are out there on Google and out there. People are like have all these things about like you have to brew it this long, use this temperature water, and all these different things. So I've been trying that out. So far so good. So
Nice.
yeah, I know, right? So tell me, what are you drinking today?
Yeah, so there's this coffee brand called Counterculture, and I found a local place was actually selling some of their beans. So I bought a bag of Counterculture, and this one's kind of it's a blend, so it's not from a specific region, but this one is more of a medium body chocolate caramel. It's
Mm.
nice. It's a little bit thicker, hence the medium body, and yeah, it's pretty good. I like it, and I'm also doing it on the V60 with the recipe that I've always kind of gone with,
Mm.
which is 15 grams of water for every gram of bean. So yeah,
Mm.
that's my method.
Okay. So
Yeah,
the method I'm using right now is like you use a timer. So like,
yeah,
you pour like the first pour you pour for 30 seconds, you get 50 grams of water, and then it goes from there. And you kind of
yeah,
go up by increments of 60. And yeah, so that's kind of new to me because I've never used the V60 ingredients or a recipe. So yeah, it's good
yeah,
stuff. I like it. It
yeah.
actually tastes really good. So
Nice. Yeah, it's all about that bloom phase in the
yeah,
beginning. Yes.
yeah. Live and you learn.
Nice. So, Javian, obviously you've been in the college teaching world a handful of years now. And my question starts with, when does this process actually start? So, people think like, oh, I'm going to start applying for schools kind of when things open up. But, go back maybe a year or two before that. When does this process start? When should you really start thinking about applying for jobs? And when does that prep work begin?
Well, before I answer your question, I just want to state that I don't necessarily consider myself like an expert on the topic. Obviously, I've been through the process a number of times, and there's certain things I think have allowed me to have some success in at least advancing in different rounds and having some success, getting a job. But to answer your question, I think it starts basically when you enter graduate school. Like if you're getting, if your goal is to get a collegiate teaching position, most likely you're going to want to get a doctorate. So to me, it starts basically day one in your doctoral degree, because that's the time where you need to start, building up your marketability, doing research, getting recordings ready, networking, getting publications, doing all these things so that when it's time, once you're done with the degree, your package or your CV is really strong, right? I always say, in a doctoral degree, in some regards, if you're a trumpet player or a trombone player or a clarinet player, the playing is, in my opinion, I think the playing is the least important in a doctoral degree because once you're applying for jobs, and everyone's looking at your materials, like everyone can play, right? They wouldn't be applying for these jobs if they couldn't play their instrument, right? So to me, like the difference is the other things, the intangible things. Do you have experience teaching like a music history class or a music theory class, or like what else do you do outside of just like your instruments? Because as you and I both know, is that the market is changing and you got to be able to do just more than one thing. I mean, there are jobs where it's just like a trumpet job or just a clarinet job. But for the most part, those jobs are few in between. And if you're just coming out of, your doctoral degree, chances are you're going to be at maybe a smaller institution that's going to require you to do other things outside of your principal area. So I would say it definitely starts day one of your doctoral. You know, Lucky for me, and you know this as well because you're in the program. Our teacher at FSU was like all about marketability from like day one. I remember auditioning for the doctoral program, and it's like, this is the time for you to get your stuff together and really become very marketable. So I think you can get a job one day. I think you'd be very marketable one day. I'm gonna help guide you through that process and while you're here, so that when you're done, then we have a strong package to put forth in the job search. So it really starts day one, and even my graduate students, even though they're just master students, I kind of have the same approach. It's like you need to start thinking about the things outside of just trumpet. Like, what are your other interests that can help you be employable, be marketable? So yeah, it definitely starts day one. Because I think if you're finishing your doctorate, and then you're trying to get all your stuff together, then in some regards, it's probably, I wouldn't say it's too late. It's just you may not be as competitive for a job like as soon as you're done. So that's why I say it really starts that day one. So you have 3 years of research, 3 years of recordings, 3 years of scholarly work, all those things. So when you're done, you can kind of hit the ground running. At least, have a fighting chance at the very least. Because as you know, this is the whole music industry is very competitive, and getting a college teaching job is no different than that. So I would definitely say it starts day one. Find what interests you. So that, as I'm saying that, this reminds me. So when I was applying for doctoral programs, I applied, I auditioned at Peabody, right? And Joe Bergstaller was the trumpet teacher there at the time. And when I did my audition went pretty well, and I felt good about it. But at the end of my audition, we were like just talking, kind of like a mini interview session, and it was him and Phil Sineticore were in the room, and which was weird for me because like these guys were like these big figures in my head at the time, and he asked me a question that I did not have an answer to. He's like, "So, you want to go into college teaching? What makes you special?" Because at the end of the day, everyone's going to have a doctorate when they're applying for college jobs, right? Everyone can play. So what makes you different? And at that time, I did not have an answer, right? And ever since that he asked me that question, I spent the next however many years trying to figure out what is my niche, what are my interests, what separates me from, someone else with a DM or DMA. So I'm glad he asked me that question because it made me have to like reevaluate, those things because you don't really think about it. Because I'm just playing trumpet.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that inspired me to like really figure out where or what my interests are, like what's going to make me stand out from other folks.
Nice. So let's say the last 3 years, you're in your doctorate, you've put in the work, you've gotten some publications done, got really good quality recordings, you've done all kind of the grunt work. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say you're at the end of your doctorate program and you see some job postings. Mm-hmm. Can you start from that process? Like, okay, everything that you just said you've done, now there's a job opportunity. Mm-hmm. How do you prepare for that? And almost give us like a crash course from like,
wow, okay,
that point on to, yeah, I know. But I feel like this is really helpful because in my opinion, I see a lot of information about audition stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like, okay, for the beginning that they post the job, take us through everything that you
Yeah.
do, that type of thing. But I don't really see a lot of stuff online about, college teaching positions and this kind of process.
Mm-hmm.
It's very unfamiliar for me, at least. For you, you've experienced it and lived it, so you know exactly what that's like. But I think this could be really beneficial for people that are maybe at that position, or maybe in a few months when they graduate and jobs are posted, they can kind of almost get the sense of what to expect or what to think about. So can you kind of take us through like a crash course,
Yeah,
so to
yeah.
speak? And if I come up with something too, or I might interject at different times
Oh
and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
pull you in different directions. So just be patient with me. But yeah, so the job is
No,
posted.
yeah.
You're at school, you see it. What do you do?
That's a really good question. Because you're right. There aren't really a lot of sources out there that kind of give you a crash course on that. So when I first see a job posting, I make sure I read the description, like see what they want. Is it a trumpet and something else? Like is it trumpet in theory, or trumpet in music history, or is it trumpet in like classical trumpet and jazz? Like, get a real sense of like what they're asking for. Then I do a lot of research on the institution, get a sense of like what that institution values, like what's the size of the school, where is it located, all these different things. And then say, whatever the job is, and that's like, okay, I can see myself in this position. Then I start applying to it. So, based on whatever the job description is, when I'm doing my CV, not my CV, sorry, my cover letter, that you would have to write some type of cover letter for a job. And typically I'll write my cover letter to address the things that they want in the job description. So for instance, if it's a job posting on that they want someone who teaches trumpet and say like a music history class, for instance, then I'm just like, okay, in my cover letter, I'll talk about my trumpet teaching experience. If I was a TA during my doctorate, so I can talk directly about, my teaching philosophy, my teaching experience at the collegiate level, competitions, my performance activities, all those things. Those are the easy things, right? That'll, go across the board, regardless of what the job is. And then, if it's a trumpet and music history job, then I talk about what other teaching experiences I have in that cover letter. I'll spend like maybe a paragraph talking about my trumpet teaching experience, and maybe another paragraph about my teaching experience within like the music history realm, right? So I make sure I cover that, and it varies from person to person based on their experience. And which brings me back to like what I was saying earlier about like marketability and making sure like you're doing all these different things outside of just like playing trumpet in your doctoral degree. So I'll spend another paragraph just on that, and then depending whatever they're asking for, typically I'll talk about recruiting, because recruiting is one of the most important aspects of a job, because you're most likely going to get asked about it if you get to the interview process. And even if you get the job, recruiting is really, really important, right? It's a bloodline to any program. So I spend, a few sentences talking about my recruiting philosophy. And then, I make sure that even after I finish my cover letter, I go back, I read a description letter, and I make sure like I hit all these points, and I'm addressing those points with things I've already done and things I would like to do, because they want to see like, all right, we get like you want to do these things, but what have you done? And an interesting thing, now that I'm in my position now, I've served on a few search committees for faculty positions in our department. And it's interesting being on this side of it, because now you see these little things and the differences between people's cover letters and their CVs. So definitely making sure, when you're doing your cover letter, that you're hitting those points. And then my CV, and the CV is something I started like my first year of my doctoral degree, and I just like add on as I did more things. I think a really good exercise is to write a CV of what you want it to look like in a few years, like say your first year of your doctorate, and then try to make sure you hit those objectives. So when it's time for applying for this job, this fictitious job, I make sure my cover letter is nicely organized. It looks very clean, it's very organized, it's filled with, all of my teaching experience, all of my experience in terms of performance. If you've worked on or like any service, like this could be committees, this could be things within your community, this could be serving on different organizations like ITG or NTC or anything like that. I put that in my service and all these different things, but you really just want your CV to look really clean, really organized. I've come to share the opinion that a really sloppy CV makes me just like go to the next application like really quickly because you have so many applicants to look through. Like you don't want to be like trying to figure out what this person is saying or what their intentions are. So it has to be really, really clean. So once I submit my cover letter, and obviously I get my cover letter proofread by usually a few different people, all right? Because you want to make sure like not only that it reads well, that like you're articulating what you think you're articulating. And so like, having a mentor, like, like we have, I can easily send my cover letter to my former teachers and they'll read it and it's like, all right, this looks good. Maybe try this, maybe try that so that when I submit, it reads really, really well. So after I submit my cover letter and my CV, and then sometimes jobs they want you to send recordings in the first round, or links to a recording. So goes back to what I was saying about making sure you have really good recordings. And for me, like when I do my recordings, I did some audio recordings as well as video. I think it's good to have both. Sometimes they'll specify that they only want video recordings. So just again, making sure you're really reading the description of the job and what they want so that you're submitting exactly what they want, no more, no less. Because again, they have a lot to go through, right? And they don't want to be having to go through like pages and pages of your materials, right? That can be you'd be surprised how biased one can or how much you can turn off somebody by like applying all this information that they didn't ask for, right? So making sure you have clean recordings. Obviously, you don't want to have something that's like poorly produced, a lot of like chip notes, a lot of missed things. You just want a nice clean recording. So I'll submit all those materials, and then from there, it's really a waiting game. And again, depending on the job, you know, it sometimes it might take a week, or sometimes it might take months, depending on however the search committee. I mean, there's a lot of factors that is either outside of the committee's control. Sometimes it's university issues. But anyway, so assuming I get a call back after I submit these materials, then that first round is typically like a Skype interview or Zoom today, a Zoom interview. So before I do those interviews, if you're lucky enough to get that interview, sometimes they're 30-minute interviews, sometimes they're 15-minute interviews. It really depends on what the committee has decided to do. But when I get the notifications like, hey, we would like to interview you, and I was like, okay, great. I spend days researching um, the school. I mean, even though I already did it, I do a more deep dive into the school. Like, where's the school located? What are the issues? Like, is it a school in a rural area? Okay, if it's in a rural area, then you kind of have an idea like what the issues are going to be at this particular school. Or if it's in the middle of a big city, then you kind of know what the issues might be. Where are the big programs like recruiting programs in the area? I think it's good to know those things. I think it's good to know who's going to be on the committee. They'll send you a list who's all on the committee, and seeing if you know anybody, or if that way you can kind of talk to them like you know them. I mean, you don't have to like say their names or anything like that in the interview, but I think it's good just to know like who's in your committee, like what's their area of focus. That way you can in I guess some ways maybe have a connection with them. But doing a lot of research in the program, you want to know everything that you can about that program before that very first interview. So I spend, typically hours just reading as much as I can about the curriculum, the type of degrees they offer, the size of their department, everything you can know about the program. I think is really important to know before you get to that first interview. Now, when I do the also another thing I do, and sorry if I'm going too long here.
No, no, you're good. You're great.
uh, I
Keep
do a
going.
lot of I do a lot of practice interviews, right? It's like preparing for a recital, right? There are a lot of great resources online about like interview questions for higher ed. So, I found some good ones and there'll be like 100 questions. And like I'll either record myself like either on Zoom or on my phone or something, and I will just state the question and then I'll answer it and then I'll rewatch this whole thing because there's little things you can do that you may not realize you do, little nervous ticks that a committee member might see it and it's like, oh, he seems either nervous or like he's stumbling over himself, but you may not realize that unless you practice answering the questions. And there are certain questions that you'll probably get across the board, like something regarding to recruiting, talking about your teaching philosophies, talking about collaborations with other people. So those are typically questions that you're going to get regardless of the institution, right? Um, so I like I said, like spending a lot of time practicing interviewing either in the mirror or on camera. I think doing it on camera is best because you can go back and actually watch yourself answer it. Or if you have a friend who can ask the questions, like I've actually did this. A good friend of mine was interviewing for a job. They had like their first round Skype interview, and they asked me, "Hey, could I like do a mock interview with you?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So we did like a mock interview on Zoom, and I asked him questions and he answered, and I gave him feedback. And I think that's really important. I think that really helps. So when you get into the real interview, you feel comfortable. It's like, all right, I've already done this a bunch of times, and you can really flush out your answers. To me, like the best interviews are not people who just like talk, talk, talk. It's people who have very concise answers. You can tell it's very thought out. It's like, here's my teaching philosophies: A, B, C, D. Boom, done. Next question. This is my philosophy on recruiting: A, B, C, D. Done. So it's about like really flushing out your answers and having a really defined like philosophy to being a higher ed educator. So I practice that, and I want to make sure like my answers are very concise. um and then if after that first interview, sometimes it can be another week or two before they call you back if you're fortunate. And if you get called back for the final round, and it typically, granted, there might be a little different now with COVID, but you do that last round of interviews in person. Typically they'll fly you out. You'll fly in like the day before, and you get there and you have to do a mini recital, maybe like 20-30 minutes recital, and then followed by interview with the committee, probably an interview with like the dean or the department chair or maybe both. You'll do a master class with students, maybe hang out with the students so they can talk to you and ask you questions, meet and greet with different people in the faculty department. So the interview day is a very long day. I've done a few of these, and it usually starts early in the morning. I've had some where, you know, they meet me at my hotel at like 8 a.m. We go maybe get a quick breakfast or coffee, and then you're on at like from 9 until like 6 or 7 that day. So it's a really long day. And I think it's important to be mentally prepared for that. Because you kind of they send you the schedule, so you know ahead of time what you're going to be doing and like how the day is scheduled. So if you can, beforehand, kind of practice that way, like if you're recital, like I had to do a recital at like 9:30 in the morning, which is fine because that's normally when I practice anyway. So oh yeah, I'll be fine to do that. But if you're not used to like maybe doing a full recital at 9:30, maybe you'll spend some time doing a recital at 9:30 in the morning and then a master class like right after. So as you know, that's a grind. Just doing your recital plus a master class right after. That's
Yeah,
a mental
that's
grind.
that's uh That's
And
mentally exhausting.
yeah, it really is. But that's what you have to do, and you have to like mentally. It's like any other audition, just be mentally and physically prepared to do that. And then the other interviews, again, going back and practicing your interview questions and how you want to respond, and all your little mannerisms that we do without noticing it, and just kind of like practicing that. So like I when I was doing my interviews, I would practice all of these things. I would practice like, getting up early, going to the office, doing a warm up, and then doing the recital. And then after that, just like pretending I'm doing like a master class, or just like teaching a lesson, one of my students teaching a lesson, and kind of treating it, oh, this would be what the master class is like, right after I did a full recital. And then the interviews, and just practicing your interview questions over and over. I mean, you don't know what they're going to ask you, but again, there are certain questions that you're going to see across the board, right? And every once in a while, I've come across a few interview questions where it's like, I don't know, like but when that happens, I have some stories where like they asked me a question that I've never heard someone ask in an interview, and I had to sit there and think for like a few seconds, and then I was able to answer it. I think successfully, but I think there will be some curveballs. You never know what they're going to ask, but just being mentally prepared for that, and calm when those situations happen. So yeah, and so that interview day is a very long process, and I think it's really about the faculty who are interviewing. They want to see your personality, they want to see what type of person, because ultimately they're not just hiring somebody to teach, they're hiring somebody to be their colleague. So I'm not saying you need to put on your best attitudes, just like be who you are. You don't have to be fake, just be who you are, and everything else will take care of itself. And it's a really long day. I can't There's no way around it. So like I said, and after that day, you'll probably go out for dinner, and then you fly back home either sometimes that night, depending on the school, or sometimes early that next morning. So I've had a situation where I flew in that morning, did everything that day, and flew out that same night. So yeah. So you can imagine like that being a very long process, and in a very short span of time, but being mentally prepared to do all those things. So, and if you're lucky to make it to that interview, and you go through that process, then from there, it's kind of a waiting game. I'm usually, depending how many finalists, usually there's about 2 or 3 finalists that they'll interview. Um, so after that's over, I mean, if you're the first candidate, you might have to wait a little longer versus if you're the final candidate. But usually, a week or two after that, you'll hopefully get a phone call and say you won the job or whatever. So I mean, that's kind of like a long process. I know, from like cover letter to like the final interview, but it's that's kind of the game you kind of have to play with higher ed, audition process. It is a long process, and there's luck. I mean, you can have all the great materials, you can like kill your recital, you can feel like you did really good in the master class, and sometimes it's about the fit. Maybe they're looking for something different, and it's not like, oh, you weren't as good as you thought you were. It's just like maybe they were looking for something a little different for that fits their needs of their department, which happens all the time. Like I've known some search committees where we had very qualified candidates. You have these 2 or 3 people who both can do the job. Because in my opinion, like if you make it to the final round, whoever those finalists are, any one of them can do the job, right? Which is why they're the finalists. And it's really about that committee figuring out, all right, who fits best for what we do here, and with the personalities that we have in our department. So if you don't get it, it's not an indictment on who you are as a teacher or as a player. It's just about like who fits the needs of that department a little stronger. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So
yeah.
going back to something that you said earlier when you were doing your Peabody audition,
Yeah.
what separates you from others? Do you have an answer to that? I mean, what is your answer?
Yeah, so like for me, I think the difference between me and maybe somebody else is, as you know, like I have a very strong like music education background. So to me, like I have always been really into teaching, and not just like teaching trumpet, but just being a music educator. So like you already know this, but like my very first job out of my doctorate wasn't a trumpet specific teaching job. It was assistant director of bands at a liberal arts college. So my primary job was conducting and teaching methods and conducting pep band and conducting our community band and doing a lot of stuff outside of what we were quote unquote trained to do, play trumpet, teach trumpet. So I think, going all the way back to like high school, like I've just always been into like being a really good music educator, right? And throughout undergrad, throughout my master's and doctorate, to me that was going to be my niche, right? I was always really into conducting. I was always really into like teaching pedagogy, right? Like how to get students from point A to point B, right? So to me, that was my niche, and like writing about things that kind of serve that purpose, right? So like to me, that was the difference. I think most I mean, this could be a bit of a generalization, but I think most like trumpeters is it's really about like the performance aspect with them, and like getting new works produced, getting recordings done. But for me, it was about like how to teach, what to teach, how to get a student here to there, the student who struggles the most, how to get them just this much better each week. And that was to me my niche, and everything I've done I feel like has been in service to that philosophy.
That's great. That's awesome, man. One more question for you. So let's say you're at the end of your doctorate, or maybe you're, a few months or half a year removed, and you've been applying for jobs, but you haven't been able to get that first interview. What advice do you have for that young professional?
Mhm.
And are there resources out there or people that they can connect with, or I don't know, something that can help? Because obviously there's something missing, or there's something
Mhm.
that's the committee's looking at that they're not really liking. So what advice do you have for that person?
Yeah, this is real. Especially once you're finishing your doctorate and you're applying for jobs, you're not getting any bites. To me, I think the first thing you should evaluate is your CV and your cover letter. And look out and look at how your CV is organized. Is it concise? Is it really fleshed out? Are there any gaping holes in your CV? That could be like work experience or research experience or any like scholarly work experience. Really look at that. A good exercise our teacher at FSU did. He gave us CVs of trumpet professors, like when they were just coming out their doctor, like young in their career, like, and you were able to see their CVs and say, oh, okay, they had this on there, they had that on there, and they were able to get their first job out of the doctorate. So I think that was a really good exercise because I said, all right, here's their CV. They were able to get a job, or at least they were able to get interviews, right? Here's my CV. And okay, I don't have this on there. I don't have that. This is a weakness in my CV. And then try to do something depending whatever that weakness is. If it's, research or publications, then get some publications out, go write for, ITG journal, go write for, I mean, there's so many publications you can write for that are always looking for writers to do things. So if that's a gap, then, find ways to fill that gap. If it's, performance opportunities, figure that out, network with some local or regional orchestras in your area. This is where kind of like the networking comes into play. So I think that's you should first evaluate like your CV, and then obviously the next thing is kind of like evaluate your cover letter. you know I feel like very fortunate that I feel like even if I ever were to apply for another job, not that that'll happen anytime soon, but I can always send like my cover letter to my mentor, our teacher at FSU, and he'll look it over, and he's really good with that stuff. And so if you have someone like that, like a mentor who's like really good about like looking over cover letters and CVs, send your material to them and have them just be very honest. Like, all right, what's missing in my stuff? Like, is it just poorly written? Is it missing something? So I think that's where you have to first evaluate just your CV and your cover letter. And I mean, if you want to send like your recordings to somebody else to take a listen to it, then that's fine. But typically, I feel like those who don't get interviews, it comes down to like the materials in their cover letter and CV. Like I said, I've served on some search committees, and like when I look at certain CVs or cover letters, you can, it's like, I don't know about that. Even though the person could be really qualified. I've seen some really qualified people like based on like their current position. And then I look at their cover letter or their CV, and it's just like just not very organized. It's not clean, right? And that perception is everything, especially when you don't know the person. You're just going off what you see in front of you. And then you're also comparing them to however many applicants you have. So I think you have to do yourself a service by making sure that looks very clean. So I would start there. If you're not getting any bites, find where the weaknesses in your cover letter or the weaknesses in your CV are, and go from there. It is a competitive situation, applying for jobs, and you can have 40 people apply for one position easily, and everyone has their doctorate. So it's like, all right, well, how do you make the distinctions between all of these people? How do you narrow it down? And I mean, the committee will come up with parameters for that, but you need to be thinking on that level. Like, all right, if I was on a committee and I had 40 applicants for this job, how would I rank my material? All right, is it the best? Is it top 10? Is it top 20? And kind of go from there. I think it takes a lot of like being honest with yourself, some self-reflection, and really looking at your material and figuring out, all right, is this good enough to warrant that first interview? And once you get into the interview, then it's really up to you. Then you have a little more control in what's happening, because that first round is kind of a crapshoot, because you can have the best materials and it may not work. um, but funny enough, like I've applied for some jobs, and I've read the description, and I address all the things in their job description, and I knew from the moment I hit send, I was like, I'm going to get an interview for this job, because everything aligns with what my strengths are on my CV. I hit those points in my cover letter, and I just know I'm going to get an interview for this job. And like 9 out of 10, when I've had that feeling going into applying for a job, that has been the case. I have at the very least got that first interview. So I think you have to start there. Look at your materials, have somebody look at it for you, especially someone who's like maybe have served on a bunch of search committees, and just have them like be really really honest with you about like how your material reads to them. Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add or say? I mean, I think this is like you said, thorough, to the point. Like,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. Again, I definitely want to emphasize kind of like what I said earlier about like, if you're getting a doctorate, I'm under the assumption that like you want to go on higher ed. I feel like, I don't want to say why waste your time, but if that's like not the ultimate goal, then don't put yourself through all of that work. But if you are getting a doctorate and you want to go in higher ed teaching, um, it really starts day one, right? It's not, if you're a trumpet player, it's not about the trumpet playing. The doctoral degree is not just about, I mean, you have to do all your recitals, of course, and all that stuff. I'm not saying you don't practice. What I'm saying is that while you're doing your doctorate, you need to be focused on a lot of other stuff outside of trumpet. Being a doctoral trumpet student or a clarinet student or a trombone player or a cellist, it's not about the playing. It's really about developing you as a professional and getting your material to be strong for applying for jobs, uh get working on your marketability. It's really about that. Marketability is everything. And so that when you're done, you're in a competitive situation, right? Putting your best foot forward. So that would be my biggest advice to anybody who's like either a doctoral student who, or maybe just fresh out of doctoral school, or someone who's considering to be a doctoral student in the future, that if this is like the path you want to go, then you need to be thinking about all those things. I think fortunately for me, when I was at FSU and working on my doctorate, I was around a great group of DM trumpet majors. I had a very good cohort. There were like 4 or 5 of us, and we were all really good friends, and I mean we still are. And I wouldn't say we pushed each other, but like we were all very active. And said, "Oh, so and so is doing that. Oh, I need to be doing that too. So and so is doing this. Someone is publishing this. Someone is recording this album. Someone is, doing this competition." And through that, it's like, all right, it in some ways, I guess it forces you to kind of step up, but it makes you realize, like, if these people that I'm in school with are doing all these things, imagine what all the trumpet players around the country are doing, at least the ones who are going to be competitive for a job. And I think that's why, the trumpet players who were in my cohort at FSU when I was there, I think that's why we've all had a lot of success, winning jobs and getting jobs, or being finalists for jobs. It's because of that, because of, we had this really tight community, and we motivated each other. We worked with each other. We helped each other, all this thing. We talked to each other about interviews and what we're doing for our CVs, what we're doing for our cover letters. And then we also all of us had a really good teacher who was all about the marketability and making sure like our materials were really strong. So, if you're a doctoral student or entering doctoral school or considering, that's what it's all about. That's what to me, that's what the doctoral degree is about. Finding who you are, finding your niche, becoming a scholar, not just a trumpet player or whatever instrument you play. To me, that's what it's all about, you know. So
That's great, man.
That's my parting words, I guess.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, man. I know this is gonna be an asset and help a lot of people out that are on the journey. And feel free to reach out to Javian if you have questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's always willing to help out. So, well, cool, man. So let's wrap this thing up. But before we say goodbye, what are you currently listening to?
Oh, I forgot you was going to ask me that. But luckily, I've actually been listening to this group. I don't know if you know Wolfpack.
Yeah, that's funny.
Have you been listening to it?
Well, yeah, and there's like a group that's kind of associated called the Fearless Flyers. And that was the group that I was going to mention today.
Oh, that is funny. So yeah, they've been out for years. I've never heard it until like this, maybe last week. So I was listening to, I think their newest album that came out last year, and I love the first track on their album is Box Contrapuntus number 9. Like that's how they start that album. So I'm all right, I'm sold. And then but I mean, for those people who don't know, it's kind of like a funk band, indie like funk band. So they have like singers on there. Some of it's just instrumental. It's a good like blend of music, some Bach clearly. So no, that's what I've been listening to this week, and they're like really, really good. And I watched some of their live performances as well. I think they were on, I don't know, maybe like Jimmy Kimmel, one of those like late night shows a few years back. So yeah, Wolfpack, and that's spelled with a V, not a W.
Yeah. And I think it's Wolfpack.
Wolfpack, yeah, P-E-C-K, yeah, Peck. Wolfpack.
Yeah, they have a live show at Madison Square Garden that is like legit.
I have to watch that one.
Yeah, so a group that I've been checking out is called the Fearless Flyers, and it's kind of the same realm of like funk jam band kind of groove thing, and then also getting back into Lettuce as well. So getting into some funk and some horns and all that stuff. So it's been good to listen to while on the bike.
Yeah, you've been biking a lot lately.
Yeah, so that's been my thing. Yeah.
Well, I've been just jamming.
Yeah. No, they're great, man. And it's cool because a lot of the artists or musicians in the group kind of have their own stuff too. So you can kind of
Hmm.
go down that rabbit hole of like Corey Wong. He's one of the guitarists for Wolfpack, and he's got like his own music that's like incredible. And yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Good. I have to
Yeah.
check it out. Check this stuff
Yeah.
out. I'm new to all this, so.
No, you're good, man. So yeah, where can, well, I guess we already know where, but yeah, if you guys want to check us out on social media, Coffee and Clark's on Facebook, Coffee and Clark's on Instagram. We've been trying to post some small little clips, some highlight reels, so to speak, from episodes. That way, if you want to get a little appetizer before the actual meal, you can chew on some
Mm,
of that stuff.
I like
but
that. That was nicely done, sir.
but yeah, so Javian, if like we said earlier, if people wanted to reach out to you and ask questions, where can they find you?
Yeah, if you want to ask me questions, you can find me on Instagram at nerdyprof. That's with just one F on Instagram, or Facebook, just my name, Javian Brabham. You can shoot me a message or DM, and I'd be more than happy to, answer any questions, help however I can. Like I said, I don't consider myself an expert, but these are just based on like the things I've experienced in my short career over the past, I guess, 4 years or so, something like that. So yeah, you can contact me there. And what about you, Tyler?
Yeah, so I'm off the whole Instagram, Facebook
Mm,
grid right now,
oh
but
yeah.
I do have Facebook Messenger on my phone still in case people sent me messages through that. So you can contact me there. If not, you can always send a message to Coffee and Clark's,
Yeah,
and
we'll
yeah,
read
we
that. Yeah,
can, yeah, that can
yeah,
get
and
passed down.
yeah, and I would add, please subscribe to our YouTube page if you want to actually watch the episode, or and you can subscribe. You can send us comments in our comment section on the YouTube page, and we'll answer those. And 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If you just want to listen while you're on a walk, or on a run, or just wherever. If you're on a long drive, just go ahead, or you're taking a practice break, go ahead and listen to us on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars there. And yeah, we'll keep pumping out some content.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. We appreciate it. Javian, thank you. And till next time.
Till next time, thanks for having a cup with me.
Yes, sir. See ya.
See ya.